Hello and welcome to another episode of Sermon Braindump. My name is Scott Dalen. I'm an ELCA pastor in Southwest Iowa, and I do these videos every week for a couple different reasons. The first of which just to move my brain out of the mode of background work, what I call percolation, because I'm a fan of coffee, and unfortunately, my coffee cup is empty. Blast. Anyway, I've got off track. So to move my brain out of the background work and move into the process of actually writing and preparing the sermon that I'll preach to my congregation for the weekend. That's the first reason. And the second reason is just to allow you, the viewer, who have come across this video for whatever reason, whether you are a regular viewer every week or if you just happen to stumble on this one, to gain some insight into the assigned text for the week. So that's why I do these. This particular Sunday, April 9th, 2017, is Palm Sunday. Commonly known as the time when Jesus comes into the city of Jerusalem, entering into the final week of his life, leading, and this is kicking off Holy Week. Some will say that this is the last Sunday of Lent. I kind of think it is, and I kind of think it's its own thing. Different liturgical people might argue with me on that, but it's a little bit of both. Again, this kicks off Holy Week, so we have various stories now of Jesus coming into Jerusalem, which will be this week's gospel, and then various teachings in the temple and travel in and out of the city as he stays in the village just outside the city. And that will lead us up into the Last Supper, which is Maundy, Thursday, and then we'll have the Passion, which happens on Good Friday when Jesus is arrested or betrayed and arrested and tortured and killed, and then leading into Easter Sunday, which will be a week from now. So that's kind of all that's going on now. In some circles, they have combined this being Palm Sunday along with, they call it Palm and Passion Sunday, or they'll just call it Passion Sunday, because many people won't get to the midweek services, and because of that, it kind of almost seems like we go from the triumphal entry of Jesus into Jerusalem straight to the triumph of coming out of the tomb on Sunday, or next Sunday, and we skip over the death, all of the stuff. And so many churches will, in addition to having the triumphal entry, usually at the beginning of the service is when they do it, and do the palm procession, to moving then in through the reading of the Passion narrative in anticipation then of Easter the following weekend. I don't do that. I tend to think that if somebody wants to experience those different events, that they'll be in church. So we have worship services for both Maundy, Thursday, which I'll be doing a video for that one because I will be preaching that night. That'll be coming up early next week. And then also we have stuff for Good Friday and then into Easter. So that's kind of my take on it. People will disagree with me on that, but that's okay. So coming around full circle, Palm Sunday. As I mentioned before, the triumphal entry of Jesus coming into Jerusalem. His ministry has been out in Israel as he's traveled around into various places, and he's been into Jerusalem for different times and different festivals and such. But now he's actually coming in. He's coming into Jerusalem for the Passover. That is the big Jewish festival that is going on. One of three, which perhaps you've heard me say before. There were three major Jewish festivals every year. Passover is the big one, and coincides with Holy Week and Easter here in the Christian tradition, just because that's the way things work out. But so Jesus is coming into Jerusalem for the Passover, and this was a very common thing for the Jewish people to come into Jerusalem. That was the center of worship. It's where the temple was. And as I mentioned, he spends a lot of time in the temple during the day, and a lot of events of this week or the earlier part of the week happen there. So with all of that going on, that's leading up. Now we've been hearing a lot of different stories in past weeks through the season of Lent of different interactions that Jesus has had, different miracles that he's performed, different teachings that he's done. And I think all of that is important. And even though most of those came from John's gospel, now we're coming back into Matthew. Um, and sometimes you got to be careful with comparing or with bringing the gospels together because some events that are depicted in one are different in another. You always got to be careful with that. But I'm remembering these, and I think they're important because there's a question that's posed in the reading of who is this? The crowds are asking that. And I think that what we have seen of Jesus through Lent is important to consider as we consider that question. So, okay, with all that being said, I've jabbered for 5.5 minutes now. How about we actually read it? The gospel for Palm Sunday, April 9th, 2017, comes from Matthew 21, verses 1 through 11, nice and short. So I'm going to actually read it again compared to the last few weeks when I haven't. So, when they had come near Jerusalem, and had reached Bethphage at the Mount of Olives, Jesus sent 2 disciples, saying to them, "Go into the village ahead of you, and immediately you will find a donkey tied, and a colt with her. Untie them and bring them to me. If anyone says anything to you, just say this, 'The Lord needs them,' and he will send them immediately." This took place to fulfill what had been spoken through the prophet, saying, "Tell the daughter of Zion, look, your king is coming to you, humble and mounted on a donkey, and on a colt, the foal of a donkey." The disciples went and did just as Jesus had directed them. They brought the donkey and the colt and put their cloaks on them, and he sat on them. A very large crowd spread their cloaks on the road, and others cut branches from the trees and spread them on the road. The crowds that went ahead of him and that followed were shouting, "Hosanna to the Son of David! Blessed is the one who comes in the name of the Lord! Hosanna in the highest heaven!" When he entered Jerusalem, the whole city was in turmoil, asking, "Who is this?" The crowds were saying, "This is the prophet Jesus from Nazareth in Galilee." Okay, so that's the story of what's going on. Now, as Jesus has been traveling towards Jerusalem, immediately preceding this, we hear that he's in the area of Jericho. Jericho's not far away from Jerusalem. It's in the same vicinity, but as he travels through there, he encounters 2 blind men and heals them. So we have a miracle that happens right here before Jesus gets to Jerusalem. But so they're traveling, and there's some different symbolism that's going on here that in Matthew is important. Keep in mind, Matthew's intended audience was Jewish, so that's why we tend to see a lot of connections back to the prophets and back to the Old Testament, and we see that here with when he references the prophet, "Tell the daughter of Zion," that I said. That's probably why that's in there. John also features that little snippet, but Mark and Luke do not. But there's also a prophecy that the king will return appearing on the Mount of Olives. So that's probably why that comes down there. Now, I've not been to the Holy Land myself, but I've heard that from people who have, that the Mount of Olives, it's across the valley from Jerusalem, but it's really not that far away. I mean, you have to go down through this valley. It's called the Kidron Valley to go between the Mount of Olives, which is where the Garden of Gethsemane is, and then up into the city. But it's only a matter of like maybe a mile, and maybe not even that far in terms of like as the crow flies distance. So it's fairly close. But then apparently the road that goes down through the valley and then back up is very winding. I guess I'm supposed to go there about a year from now, so check back with me then, and I'll confirm. But so there's different prophecy about the triumphal king coming into the city riding on the donkey. Matthew takes that prophecy extraordinarily literally, as we hear that he's riding on both the donkey and its colt. I don't quite know how that's working unless Jesus is a trick rider and he's got one foot on each. So that's kind of where a lot of that is coming from. And so there's some different things that are happening as Jesus is coming up into the city. Coming up through out of the valley and into the city. We hear that the crowds are spreading their cloaks and taking branches and spreading them. This is something that would have happened for a visiting dignitary, someone like a super VIP. And think about rolling out the red carpet. It's the same idea. The reasoning behind it is kind of funny because consider lots of animals on the road. What else do you think is going to be sitting on the road? when that animal has gone by. Ever been to a parade with horses? You know what I'm talking about. But they don't want them to step on that. So the people are sacrificing their own stuff in order to pave the way for the important person. So that's kind of some of what this spreading the stuff on the road is about. I've always kind of laughed about that. It's the same idea of the gentleman spreading his coat over the mud puddle so his lady friend doesn't have to, or his date doesn't have to walk through the puddle. And I've always kind of wondered, I'm like, well, that's nice, but why doesn't the person just walk around it? And likewise for the VIP, why don't they just walk around the load of horse crap that's laying on the ground? And also the idea of why should the lowly have to sacrifice their stuff for the VIP so they don't get dirty? And maybe that's a sense of equality that comes into my head, that we are all equal in the eyes of God. We are all beloved children of God. So why should I like get my coat all dirty just so you don't get your feet dirty? I don't know. It seems kind of strange, but so there's different stuff going on there. We also hear the joyful proclamation of the crowd. What's interesting here in Matthew, as opposed to Luke specifies there's two different groups in the crowd, and we see that in the original Greek. What we call the crowd, he specifies two different Greek words. Now Matthew doesn't. Matthew just says the crowd. But as he's coming in, we hear the city is in turmoil. The Greek for that one, the city is shaken. Now, metaphorically, we could say I'm shaken. That doesn't mean that like somebody came up and shook me. It tends to mean like I've been emotionally affected. Like this is affecting me in some way. But what's interesting is that this word is only used about 5 times in the entire New Testament, and 3 of them are in Matthew. None of the other Gospels feature it. It pops up in just a couple of other New Testament passages, but it's the other times that Matthew uses it. There's an earthquake at the death of Jesus coming up in about a week, or on Friday, when the temple curtain, or the curtain to the inner room, is torn in two. There's an earthquake there, and there's also an earthquake at the tomb on Easter morning when the stone is being rolled away, and there's a great shaking. So the city is shaken. Now, is this because the arrival of this triumphal king is such a big deal that the ground literally shakes? Maybe. Does it just mean that his arrival is so incredible that the people are somehow affected? So it's more metaphorical? Maybe. I don't exactly know. You're open to your own interpretations on that, but it indicates that there was a very big deal going on, that Jesus coming into the city caused a turmoil of some sort, and so that's worth noting. Now, kind of where I want to go around again, and I mentioned this before, is who is this? That's what the city's asking. Who is this? And we're asking that too. Who is this that's coming in? He's treated like a triumphal king, or like like I said before, like a VIP important dignitary. That's how he's treated. And yet he's coming in humbly. He's riding on a donkey. He's not riding in a chariot. He's not riding on some great big stallion. He's riding on a donkey, and he's humble. And yet then, directly following this, he goes into the temple and he cleanses the temple. So at the same time, it's like, whoa, there's some crazy stuff going on. But who is this that's coming in, and who is the Messiah? I mean, he's called by the crowd, the prophet Jesus from Nazareth in Galilee. He's called Son of David, and that harkens back to the promise that God had made to David, that your descendant will always sit on the throne. So king, royalty, etc., etc., etc. Who is this? But the big question is, he's known as the Messiah. He's called the Messiah, or the Christ. Means the same thing, just 2 different languages. Throughout all the Gospels, he's the Messiah. Well, who is the Messiah? What is the expectation of the Messiah? Do the people expect the Messiah to be this king, this political figure? And granted, political and religious in the Jewish culture at that time, were definitely tied together. But is the Messiah going to be the person to come and kick the Romans out, or to kick the oppressive force, whoever that is? It's the Romans at this moment, and reestablish the throne, the true throne of David, and the kingdom of God's chosen people, and lead us into freedom and lead us into gloriousness, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Is that what people expect? Yes. Is that why they're excited that he's coming in? Sure. Sounds good to me. But who is he really? And what will be revealed in that this Messiah is the Son of God, is God? What is revealed that this God dies on a cross, takes this cursed death? What will be revealed through this week that is to come? And that's kind of a big question. And I don't know if I'm going to answer or going to attempt to answer that in this sermon. But just to pose the question is, who have we seen this Jesus to be in the weeks preceding Lent as we've come to this moment? Who will we see it? Who will we see that this Jesus is in the days to come? And ultimately, who will we see Jesus is in the resurrection on Easter? So that's kind of what I'm thinking at this point, that the sermon's going to go that direction, and in a lot of ways kind of leave them hanging. And it should. We celebrate today, but that celebration quickly turns when the world discovers that that God, the God that we might want, or the Messiah that we might want, is not the one that we get. Makes me think of Dark Knight. If you're a Batman fan, he's not the hero how's it go? He's the hero that we deserve, but not the one that we need right now. Something like that. I don't know. I kind of went off track there. If you have thoughts, questions, comments, by all means, throw those down in the comment section. We'll continue the conversation that way. Otherwise, have a blessed week. We'll catch you early next week with the Maundy, Thursday Sermon Braindump, and then following with the Easter one. Hope this Holy Week is powerful and meaningful for you, and we'll catch you next time.